Hello my friends and welcome back to another video where today we're going to do more of an in-depth analysis of the synopsis for the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series that was leaked a few days ago, I believe Tuesday. And to join me with today's video, I am firstly joined by Chen. Hello my friend.
Hello.
I'm also joined by Nikki.
Maikavan and Melanie.
That's great as always. And finally, Talking Tube aka Gallifane.
Hey.
Great for all of you guys to be here and join me on this analysis. So what we're going to be doing is just going line by line and discussing and analyzing what this could mean. Of course, I think I mentioned this in the previous video, this didn't reveal anything too new, but it did confirm a lot of things, which is good overall. But starting off, Amazon Studios' forthcoming series brings screens for the very first time the heroic legends of the fabled Second Age of Middle-earth history. As standard, this epic drama is set thousands of years before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. We know that. And we'll take viewers back to an era in which great powers were forged. So you start with that, great powers were forged. What do you think that could be referenced to, potentially?
I think it's the forging of the rings of power. I think we have fairly good reasons to suspect that that's kind of the premise of the show.
Yeah,
For
that's
any
what I
number of
believe too.
Yeah, for any number of reasons. I think the map that Amazon released before this was from this time because it included the realm of Eregion, where the rings were forged, and which was destroyed shortly afterwards. And so I think that's the time that we're looking at. Also, I believe there is somewhere around online, I'll find it, a comment by someone who claims to have been involved in developing the show, from a while back, I mean, who says that they eventually went away from the young Aragorn premise to retelling the making of the Rings of Power. And and that was long before we even knew it was about the Second Age at all. So that makes a lot of sense, I think.
An interesting comment as well. I'm sure for people who don't know, it was this person who actually, a year before we actually got announced it was the Second Age, revealed it, which was quite interesting. But moving on here, Gallifane, going on to the next one, Kingdoms rose to glory and fell to ruin. I believe this one's a bit more obvious. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think Númenor is one of the kingdoms it could be referencing there, and something I like about this whole sentence and really the entire synopsis is the pluralism. Like it says kingdoms, not kingdoms, so we know it's about multiple kingdoms, probably multiple races as well. Of course, practically the same thing, and that's what I'm really excited about. I'm glad that we know that it's not just about the dwarves or the elves or the Númenóreans. It's going to be about probably all of them, but of course, with just the S at the end of a word, we only know it might be like Númenor and the elves. We don't know, but I'm excited that it will be multiple kingdoms.
Yeah, even could easily be a Region as well. What do you guys think? That could be potentially the rise and fall of a Region.
Yeah, I think it will be Eregion and not Númenor. I just don't see a time jump working anywhere in this, really. And I think
Númenor will probably. It might be included or referenced. It's not going to be the main focus of the show, but it'll probably come into play.
Yeah, I mean the ruin of it. Of course it will come into play. I mean the destruction of Númenor I don't think will be in this show. I was looking back to make sure that, I wasn't misremembering about there being a spin-off. And yeah, the very first couple of articles that were written about Amazon doing a show of any kind, from the Hollywood Reporter and from Deadline, both mention a potential spin-off series, quote. So yeah, that's definitely a thing, and I think the Akalabeth, the Fall of Númenor, will be in that one.
And moving on,
that's something to think about because you don't want to. If you show the fall of Númenor, then that sort of sums up the entire story. So that would sort of cut out the potential for other spin-offs, or it could in some ways. I know that like the Avengers is doing a Loki series, despite the Avengers being somewhat summed up. But I think it could give a sense of finality that Amazon does not want us to have. But still, I think Númenor will be a big part, and the fall of it might at least be referenced and alluded to.
Yep. And moving on to the next bit, which is unlikely heroes were tested, Nikki. So this line's, unless one so far, been a bit more vague. Could this, unless I'm mistaken, which characters could this be possibly referring to?
With regards to that one, I'm actually unsure. It could be
Same, yeah.
referring to both like storylines that they're sort of making up within the story. It could be a reference to like, I mean, it even could be a reference to Galadriel, Celeborn, or Celeborn, however you want to say it, Celebrimbor. I mean, all of them have their moments of both good and bad. So I'm not. Nothing in particular in the Silmarillion or any of the books that I've read stand out to me as in unlikely heroes were tested. Could be dwarves. I'm not sure, but I think it's very exciting because it just means that they're going to be focusing a lot again on the character development and the storylines, which I was missing maybe a little from the actual books. So I'm looking forward to seeing that more in depth sort of characters just growing and developing and changing and experiencing mental challenges, you know?
Exactly, and I believe regarding the new characters, even the Amazon Studios, Amazon Prime Video Twitter account even mentioned reply to tweet saying, and also lots of new characters as well. So it looks like there really are going to be a lot of more new characters. But as you continue, this is another 50-50 line, hope hung by the finest of threads. Anybody have any ideas what this could reference to or can mean?
I think it's just, kind of the kind of language you would use in a marketing, because it is a thing of marketing, the synopsis. I just think it's, general kind of like, it's establishing the stakes that they're very high. And I'm sure there will be at some point.
Yeah,
They
because
have to be at some point.
This is kind of why I'm thinking that Númenor is still going to be a big part of it, because things like unlikely heroes were tested. I think that you'll most likely see a lot of that in Númenor because of all the arguing amongst themselves that they had with the faithful and the king's men and the middlemen, and then the elves, and then they're like both with the past of the elves and getting out of or away from Melkor, and then Sauron rising to his power. You know, there's a lot of things here, but I think it's also referring to not necessarily just the first season, but all of the seasons, because it is going to develop a lot.
And something to the last sentence, it says both familiar and new. Something to consider is that they may be talking about the lore rather than Peter Jackson's adaptation. So they might be talking about, we will see Celebrimbor when they say familiar, and new as in John or something like that, you know? Of course, that's
Yeah,
not
exactly.
a Middle Earth name, but they might just completely make
Could
up
be.
characters. Definitely
Yeah.
will. But I'm assuming they're going to make up minor characters, because if they make up a major character, I think that would be sort of controversial. But again, they might do it. I just think, in the Second Age, they've already got all the main characters they need. They just need some supporting characters and definitely a couple of villains.
Oh yeah, for
Minor
sure.
villains.
Minor villains, yeah.
Yep. And the next line, which has caused a lot of discussion and debate, and the greatest villain that ever flowed from Tolkien's pen threatened to cover all the world in darkness. So, for my personal take from that one is people focused on the greatest villain, but is Amazon's interpretation of that? Of course, people like us will probably be like, that has to be Morgoth, but it depends on how you interpret greatest, because Tolkien's legacy 70, 80 years on, his greatest villain that he technically wrote was Sauron, because that's what most people remember, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So what's everybody's
I was
take on that?
thinking the same thing. I was reading that and I was like, wait, the greatest villain, that's not actually true. I remember
Yeah.
when I first discovered The Lord of the Rings, and I was on this chat forum and I was talking about The Lord of the Rings, and this guy comes onto my privates and he's like, so just to test your knowledge, who was the actual greatest villain? I was like, of course it was Sauron. And he's like, fully abusing me, calling me a liar and not a fan at all, because obviously it was a Morgoth or Melkor or I was just, yeah, I hadn't even read the Silmarillion yet. I was I was 12 years old. I had barely read The Lord of the Rings, and I was like, oh, okay. So for them, it would be Sauron, but for us, of course, it's not the greatest villain.
Yeah, but Amazon wasn't ever going to say, "Well, we're going to feature the second best villain." You know,
Yeah,
you have
true.
to
You
read
can't really
this
say
thing.
that. Doesn't sound very
Yeah,
exciting.
you have to read
Well-
this thing through the eyes of a marketing department, really. So yeah, and Sauron is not the greatest in stature or perhaps wickedness, but he's certainly the most enduring villain of
Oh yeah,
Tolkien's.
that's true.
And so he's the greatest villain in that way, I think, which is what they're going for.
Yeah. I guess you can
think-
say it's the greatest, but not the most powerful of them.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Finn summoned up pretty much everything I was about to say. I really agree with everything
Yep.
you said.
And I think one thing we should remember with that line is that this synopsis, I don't believe, is really targeted at hardcore Tolkien fans like us or the Tolkien community, because this was a leak, remember, so it probably was going to be released at a later date where it probably be targeted at more of the general audience and general public. So that's why he wanted the synopsis for the show, or the greatest villain that's ever flowed from Tolkien's pen, to market
Oh
it.
yeah, for sure. They were
So
always going to target, like they
mhm.
have to have a wider audience than just the hardcore fans of Tolkien. So
Yeah,
they were
absolutely.
always going to target
Yep.
a bigger audience, which is, yeah, it makes sense. I can understand why they would choose those words.
And something else that I just remembered is that I think it was Tom Shippey who said that the Tolkien estate was going to be very closely governing what happened in the series, and that they had this sort of outline, and they had to follow that outline. They could not go outside of the major events. And again, this is sort of opinionated, but I think if they swapped Sauron and Melkor, it would cause what you could call a major change rather than a minor change. And the Tolkien estate would probably not be happy with that, and they'd probably try to stop it. So I think
Yeah.
we can be like 95% sure they're talking about Sauron, but there is a chance, very, very small chance, that they are talking about Morgoth. But if they do choose to do Morgoth, then you're going to think about where Sauron is, because both from a lore standpoint and from someone who's only ever seen the movies or just read The Lord of the Rings, you're going to be really curious about Sauron, and then you'd have to bring in two Dark Lords.
And
Or,
also,
I don't know,
isn't
say
Morgoth in the first age and not the second age?
Yeah.
Don't they
Yeah.
have the
Yeah,
right
Morgoth
for only
isn't
the
in the
second
second
age?
at all.
So that would be a direct violation of what they're allowed to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
You
it would be.
Possibly, but we don't actually quite know anymore, because there's been some revelations that maybe they have more rights to certain stuff. So maybe in 2017, 2018, that might have been the case, but now it's a bit more, still really unlikely, but it's still quite in the grey area regarding the rights, etc. Because you never know, it's really, really unlikely, and that moves on to our next line as well. Beginning in a relative peace, time of peace. So that I know Chen knows from the start where he believes this is set then from that.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's the time of the forging of the rings. Sauron has just appeared in human form. I mean, just everything moves in like a couple of centuries in this period, but still, he's just appeared in human form. Everything in Middle-earth is going, like fine. And so it really sits with that. It doesn't sit very well, really, with the time of the fall of Númenor, because at that time, large parts of Middle-earth are dominated by Sauron in a form of tyranny, and so you wouldn't call that relative peace. And so, yeah, I think it sits with, and it's a good idea. I like the notion of starting in a place of relative peace, so that when that peace then goes away, you really feel its absence. I think it's a
Yeah,
good
it does
dramatic
say
device.
also as they confront the long-feared re-emergence of evil to Middle-earth. So it has to be like either between the time of Sauron first emerging and then next time, or it has to be after Morgoth and before Sauron.
Yeah, so date-wise, that would be so Sauron returned to Middle-earth after the first age, and I believe C500 of the second age. So that means it has to at least start from there, and then hope re-emergence. So I believe between 500 and 1200, that's a good enough time frame for it to build up within Middle Earth. So once you do get to that, 1200 to 1500 time period. It would have built up to a much higher level.
I agree. I think it's going to occur sometime around the year 1000. I believe that was the time when he started inhabiting Mordor. So I think that would really be when everybody, well, not everybody, because he still did go on to make the rings, but I think for an omniscient viewer, such as the watcher of the series would be, that's when things start to get really suspicious. Assuming they do show that, they might mix up events. He might make the rings and then go to Mordor. I think that would be a minor enough change, but it's probably going to be around the year 1000.
I think like 1,300, 500.
Could be, yeah.
That sort of thing. Yeah, they can play with it a little bit.
I feel like they should start a little bit early, like 1,000 more so than 1,300, just because it gives them more room if they want to make a lot of seasons without having to make up a ton of new storylines to fill the spaces.
But they can also abridge the time. They don't have to show like second age 1000 and then the next shot it's 1300 or something like that. They can just sort of squish it together. So he makes Baradur, then he makes the rings and something like that, and he can swap it up. I think as long as it's not he makes the rings, then he dies, comes back and makes more rings. I think the Tolkien estate will be okay with it.
Yeah, true.
And
I like the
the
idea of them following an ensemble of characters as well. I think that's it's nice. It's kind of like the setup of Game of Thrones, but not entirely. I think they're sort of looking to them to learn at least what they did right and what they did wrong.
Yeah, because I believe that this is I don't think a lot of people agree with me, but this is one of the most interesting lines from the synopsis, an ensemble cast of characters. That means we're going to be seeing lots of different lines, even though we did kind of speculate that, but it's interesting that Amazon are actually going to really have maybe, I think, Chen, you can I think you have a better idea than I do of where the different plot points can be, where the different storylines can be.
Yeah, I think we can list a couple. Like we have a region, that's one. We'll have Lindon, which is mentioned here. That's two. I think it will be like, they don't like what's going on in a region, and they're trying to maintain a very, very fragile foreign relations with them. We'll have Númenor, that's three.
And Misty Mountains, that's four.
You will have Moria, which makes a lot of sense because it's right near a region and it has a very good friendship with it.
I think that's very exciting. I like that storyline.
And something to consider, I think we all know that they're going to include dwarves. It's been hinted at a couple of times in both the synopsis and the teaser trailer. So a dwarf lives, I think at maximum around like 250 years. We don't have very much information at all. And in the Second Age, it could definitely be longer because decay of races is something we see in Tolkien's works, but around 250 years is the lifespan of a dwarf. And if they're going to include dwarves, they've got sort of a 250-year time range for a specific dwarf, and they probably shouldn't go outside of that. Again, they can sort of stretch the timeline out or compact it more, but like within 500 years is probably when the show should occur, because then you can show a dwarf king and then his son, or maybe you can just do 250 years and just have one dwarf in this series. Because something you don't want is an elf to be the main character, and then if it starts in like the year 500 of the Second Age, and then it ends in like the year 2000 of the Second Age, all the people at the beginning, aside from the elf, are going to be dead, and then all the people in the end, sorry, that didn't make sense. All the people in the end are going to be dead, except for the elves, which would be a little bit weird, because then they wouldn't really be the main characters in a sense. They still could be, but then they'd be taking the Walking Dead route, and I don't think people like that much.
Well, I agree, exactly.
Yeah, Game of Thrones did kill a lot of characters.
Yeah. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how, the difference between the elves and how they age throughout the series and the dwarves, because it's going to have to be very obvious. If you have like Legolas and Gimli, I'm using them just as an example. If you have their friendship throughout the ages, and you follow their storyline as two of the ensembles, the dwarf is naturally going to look older and older while the elf isn't going to change that much. So it's going to be interesting to see that dynamic.
The thing is that the elf that has a friendship with a dwarf is Celebrimbor, and he doesn't make it all the way through, so...
that's true, but I mean, like,
his
if they
friend is
make up more
Narvi.
storylines.
Narvi, the guy who built the doors of Moria, in fact.
And talking about...
Unfortunately, we don't even know that much about Narvi. We don't really know much about... Well, we know he made the doors.
That's
about all. I think we do know like a couple of other things, but nothing really important.
And
really, it's only like in the Second Age when the dwarves come into play, because like we've got a couple of genealogical charts, but they're very sparse. Whereas like even the genealogical chart of Hobbiton is much greater than that of the dwarves, especially because we don't even have birth and death dates for all of those dwarves.
And we were talking about the timeline and ages, but look at the last line. We'll carve out legacies that live on long after they are gone. That can't really reference to elves then, can it really?
Oh, it can if they die like Celebrimbor, sure.
True, but the majority is like Galadriel, Elrond, Celeborn, actually to be fair, Gil-galad. So actually, reflecting on that now, there is more of a chance, but I think that line specifically is more aimed at men. But as we go back, it says, confront the long-feared re-emergence of evil to Middle-earth. We've just covered that. Then from the darkest depths of the Misty Mountains. I think, sure, everybody's happy with that line. So yeah, what's everybody's opinions on that?
Misty Mountains one? Yeah, it's just Moria, I think.
It's got to be. I think that's what everyone thinks. I'm really excited for that. I think we've already been in enough podcasts for y'all to know that I didn't like how the majority of the dwarves were played. So I'll be really excited to see a fresh take on them, and hopefully them not be either comedic relief or caught into a really bad love triangle.
Yeah, people were really... Yeah, that's actually true. But people are really happy that names such as the Misty Mountains and the majestic forest of Lindon were also mentioned as well, because personally Lindon is quite a... Not a lot of people think this, but it's my favourite place. I'm most looking forward to seeing in the show, seeing the elf capital of Lindon and seeing Elrond there and Gil-galad, etc. But it's great that they are maybe potentially naming places now, so it's great that and also another name place, the Island Kingdom of Númenor. So that itself, I believe, sets up already, as Chen mentioned earlier. Starts off with the Misty Mountains, that's the Irigionera. Then the majestic forest of the elf capital of Lindon. Okay, that's going to be Lindon, Eriadorbit. Then the breathtaking Island Kingdom of Númenor. So I think that's already there. Just put out the three main plot lines. So what does everybody think about that?
I think there would be a couple more. I think they're like withholding a couple just for the...
Well, I think it's weird that they don't mention a region at all. It's like,
I think they want it up their sleeve.
Yeah, possibly. But I remember mentioning Lindon in one of our very first podcasts, and I agree with you, Fellowship. I think it's that's an exciting storyline, and I am looking forward to following Galadriel and Elrond and all of the elves, because I don't keep it a secret that elves are my favorites of Tolkien's creations. So yeah.
And also, carrying on with plot points, the furthest reach of this map. So this got a lot of people into a frenzy as well. And what does this mean? Who wants to explain what this could potentially mean?
I think it's Arad. I think, the far south of Middle-earth. I wasn't really very convinced that it would be a part of the story because it doesn't really fit. But the thing about Harad is that it is included in the map that was released by Amazon. But I always saw it as well. It's there so that Númenor could be framed in nicely. But now, having read this, could be a plot there, and I actually am hugely in favor of this because I think Harad has the potential to show us something visually that we haven't seen before. Something a little bit less, European looking, like more Middle Eastern, more African looking, kind of deserts and things. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, but I believe the only potential problem that might come out of this release this early is that we know for quite a while there has been lots of debate on the diversity of the cast and the race of the cast, etc. But now a lot of people are seem to be okay. They somehow might feel a bit reassured now that okay, that's fine. I was worrying at the start, but now all of the I don't know diverse actors are probably going to be playing Haradrim or Easterlings. That's fine. And now we're going to go through this little period of peace. Then when the teaser trailer drops, and then we see a black Númenorian, not a black Númenorian in the Tolkien race, but a black Númenorian person or a black elf, is going to go all crazy again. I know me kind of talked about that as well. But I think that's a little potential thing that might be the only little downside of that. Because since then.
Not all of these people, Amazon calls them diverse people. Not all of them are going to play Haradrim. There's just no way. No.
I don't see the issue there. I think that as long as the actor plays the character and portrays the character the way he's supposed to portray them, I don't see the big deal. I don't understand why people are making drama.
As long as it makes sense. Like for me, if
Yeah, it has
Theoden
to.
was black but all of the other Rohirrim were white, it would be weird because especially when a culture is so utterly small, it's gonna like even out. Eventually, everyone's gonna be relatively the same color. And you see that today, but of course, like the United States has like 300 million people in it, so it happens much, much slower. But eventually, everyone will sort of become the same skin color, and with much, much smaller populations, such as even Númenor and the Rohirrim, Gondor, and some of the Elven kingdoms as well, they would sort of even out.
I think the issue is that it needs to settle with the design aesthetic. Like if you have let's look at Númenor for example, and you have a design aesthetic that is kind of like I don't know, like medieval Carolingian France, like medieval France, and you have like people of various ethnicities there, it would look a bit weird. But if you design the place and you give it a kind of Middle Eastern style, like maybe an old Persian Empire or ancient Egypt, that way it could work quite well. So it depends on the design.
I pictured Númenor as kind of like what you described there with the sort of Middle Eastern Persian Empire meeting the Middle Ages, sort of in like this massive mix-up.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it depends. We'll see.
Yeah. And then just moving on to the final line, as I think you mentioned earlier, will carve out legacies that live on long after they are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're referring to the rings and stuff. Yeah.
One of you can start.
Yeah, it's both the characters and the kingdoms. So most of these kingdoms are definitely going to be gone at some point or another. So that works. And characters, yeah, even the elves, some of them die. So it works. It makes sense.
Yeah, it's both people and hereditary, like their children, and also their way of life, and the rings and the jewelry, all of it, I think.
Yep, really interesting. And I want to, now I've gone through the entire thing, I just want to ask, I'm the first time actually going to start off with is Nikki, because I know she has quite an interesting opinion on this. So what's your reaction to this overall? What are your opinions?
Well, honestly, I wasn't surprised. I have to keep reminding myself that not everyone is as big of a geek when it comes to this as I am. I knew this was happening while it was under development because I've been watching and paying attention to it. And when they released the little trailer about the crew, I bawled my eyes out because I was like, it's actually happening. I'm so excited. I don't know what to do with myself. So I've been following this so closely, reading every single tiny bit of news that I could find and scouring over discussion boards that I could find, everything like that. So for me, reading this, I was like, wait, this is nothing new. We've been talking about this for months. We know this is going to happen, but it's a bit of a relief that they've put it into words so that it's out there.
But it wasn't meant to happen, remember though, haha. You have to remember that. It wasn't meant to be leaked now. which is
Yeah, true.
to that. But yeah,
True.
is great. I think Chen and Galifin agree with as well. It's good to have confirmation and finally that all the speculation been going in circles and circles and circles for months now, even reaching a year of just getting to the same point again, basically getting nowhere. But now we've got confirmation, which is of course great.
Yeah, it's reassuring. That's definitely a good thing, I reckon. It's about
I could
time that we heard something new, I feel.
I could point out like 7 of your videos and the podcasts in which you or one of us has mentioned the dwarves, Númenor, Lindon. I think the whole community really knew that, but it is really, really nice to have confirmation. And I guess the ensemble cast is that phrase sort of brings a little bit of new information to the table. But other than that, yeah, it's really nice to have confirmation.
And thank you to the Wandering Net for bringing us this information. It's finally got more people talking about it. And I just want to ask everyone: has this made you more excited for the show? Has it, or has it still, or maybe, hopefully, it'll be a success? You start with Nikki or Ken, either one of you.
All right, I'll go first. Honestly, I don't think I could get more excited than I already am. I've always been excited for this, and I'm just happy that we have an opportunity here to keep immersing ourselves into the world of Tolkien, not just by books, but visually as well. So I'm just waiting, and I'm waiting for more news, and yeah, hoping that Amazon will soon release the lid a little bit on what they're actually doing so we can see more and feel even more reassured.
Yeah, reassurance, because this wasn't, again, as I mentioned again, not meant to happen. But that's it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to all my guests for coming on here.
Great to be on. It was a lot of fun
Yeah.
talking about all this stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great.
Cool, and until the next video, my friends, goodbye.